Hello, everyone, and welcome to Whispering Woods. I'm here to help you unwind tonight, to slow your breathing, clear your thoughts, and drift into calm. Find a comfortable place, let the world outside fade, and just listen. Before we begin, if stories like this help you find a little peace at the end of the day, feel free to like this video and subscribe to Whispering Woods. It lets these quiet tales keep finding the ones who need them. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? The evening light through old curtains turns everything amber, like honey spilled across worn floorboards. Outside, the first drops of October rain tap against windows that have watched 100 seasons pass. There's a particular stillness that settles into rooms at dusk, when the day releases its hold and night hasn't quite arrived. When dust motes drift through slanted beams and the world feels suspended between moments. The smell of paper and old wood, of rain on pavement and somewhere distant, bread baking. This is the hour when memories surface like photographs developing in gentle solution, when time folds back on itself and what was lost might, just for a moment, be found again. I found the letter on a Tuesday in March, tucked inside a book I'd owned for 20 years. The book was nothing special. A poetry collection I'd bought at a used bookstore in college. Its spine cracked in 3 places, margins filled with penciled notes in handwriting I no longer quite recognized as my own. I'd pulled it from the shelf on a whim, drawn by something I couldn't name, perhaps the particular quality of afternoon light falling across the living room, or the way the wind that day sounded like it was asking a question. The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper that had yellowed slightly at the edges. My name was written across the front in careful cursive, but there was no return address, no postmark, no indication of where it had come from or how long it had been waiting. There, between pages 73 and 74, pressed between poems about rain and forgetting. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the slight texture of the paper. Something about it felt important, though I couldn't say why. I almost didn't open it. There was something about the way it had appeared, so quietly, so unexpectedly, that made me want to preserve the mystery of it. But curiosity, as it always does, won out. I slid my finger under the flap, careful not to tear the paper, and drew out a single sheet, folded once. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, neat and deliberate, each letter formed with care. "Dear friend," it began, and I smiled at the formality of it, the old-fashioned courtesy. "I'm writing to you from the Evergreen Cafe on 5th Street, where the rain is painting the windows and turning everyone outside into watercolor figures, blurred and dreamlike. I come here most Tuesday afternoons, claiming the corner table by the window, ordering the same pot of chamomile tea, watching the light change as the hours pass. I write letters here to people I've known and people I haven't, to versions of myself I used to be and versions I might still become. I write them without knowing if they'll ever be read, but that's not really the point. The point is the writing itself, the act of reaching across time and distance, of saying, here I am, here you are. We existed in the same world, even if only for a moment. I read it 3 times, looking for some clue as to who had written it or why it had found its way to me. The handwriting was familiar in the way that dreams are familiar, something you recognize without being able to name. The Evergreen Cafe on 5th Street had closed 15 years ago. I remembered it vaguely, a narrow place with mismatched chairs and bookshelves along the walls, the smell of coffee and old paper, the way afternoon light would pool on the wooden floors. I'd been there once or twice in college, studying for exams or meeting friends, but I had no specific memories attached to it, nothing that would explain this letter. I wonder, it continued, what you're doing when you find this. I wonder what your life looks like. Whether you're happy, whether you still think about the things we used to think were important. I wonder if you remember the Evergreen, if the name means anything to you, or if it's just another cafe that closed, another place that exists now only in the geography of memory. I'm writing this on a day when the rain won't stop, when the whole world seems hushed and introspective, and I'm thinking about all the small moments that make up a life, the tiny decisions and chance encounters that lead us to become whoever we are. The letter went on for 2 more pages, talking about nothing and everything, about rainy afternoons and the books stacked on the cafe table, about the way certain songs could transport you instantly to another time, about the peculiar loneliness of crowded places and the unexpected comfort of being alone. It was intimate without being personal, specific without revealing anything concrete. It was like eavesdropping on someone's thoughts, like finding a message in a bottle that had been floating for years, waiting to wash up on your particular shore. It wasn't signed. At the bottom of the last page, where a signature should be, there was just a line of dashes like an ellipsis extended, trailing off into silence. And below that, in smaller letters, P. S. If you found this on a Tuesday, then the timing is perfect. If not, well, time is more flexible than we think. I looked at the calendar on my phone. It was Tuesday. If stories like this calm your thoughts, you're home here in Whispering Woods. I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to remember the Evergreen Cafe more clearly. But memory is a strange thing, selective and stubborn. I could recall the general feeling of the place, the sense of it, but not the specifics. Had the corner table been by the front window or the back? What color were the walls? Did they play music, and if so, what kind? The details had dissolved like sugar in water, leaving only a faint sweetness behind. That evening, I went through my bookshelves more carefully, pulling out volume after volume, shaking them gently, letting pages fall open. I found all sorts of forgotten things. A pressed flower from someone's wedding, its petals brown and brittle, a receipt from a restaurant in Barcelona, a photograph of 3 people I didn't recognize, smiling at the camera from what looked like the 1,970 seconds, a ticket stub from a concert I couldn't remember attending, but no more letters. I tried to think practically about it. Perhaps I'd written it myself years ago, some kind of time capsule exercise, and forgotten about it. But the handwriting, while familiar, wasn't quite mine. The words felt like something I might say, but the rhythm of them was slightly off, like a song played in a different key. Perhaps a friend had written it, some elaborate joke or art project. But none of my friends were particularly elaborate or mysterious. And besides, how would they have known I'd pull that specific book from the shelf on that specific Tuesday? The more I thought about it, the more questions multiplied. If the letter had been in the book for years, why hadn't I found it before? I'd opened that book dozens of times, had read certain poems over and over. How could I have missed a cream-colored envelope, thick and obvious? And yet there was something about the paper, the way it had yellowed, that suggested age, that insisted it had been waiting there for a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Evergreen Cafe, about someone sitting in the corner by the window on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, writing letters to strangers or future selves. I thought about all the small moments that happen in the world every day, unremarked and unrecorded, how we move through our lives mostly unaware of the tiny threads connecting us to other people, other times. I thought about the books on my shelves, all the books in all the houses in all the cities, and wondered how many of them held secrets, messages, forgotten pieces of other people's lives pressed between their pages like flowers. The next Tuesday, I went to 5th Street. The Evergreen Cafe was long gone, replaced by a boutique selling expensive candles and artisanal soaps. The storefront had been renovated, the original character erased, but I stood there for a while anyway, trying to overlay my vague memories onto the present. I imagined the corner table, the window looking out onto the street, the rain painting everything in soft grays and blues. I imagined someone sitting there, writing carefully on cream-colored paper, sealing the letter without knowing where it would end up or who would read it. A woman came out of the boutique, carrying a small paper bag. She noticed me standing there and smiled. "Can I help you find something?" "No," I said. "I was just remembering something that used to be here." "The cafe?" she asked, and I nodded, surprised. People mention it sometimes. I never went there myself, but my mother did. She said it was one of those places that felt like a secret, even though anyone could walk in. Said she wrote some of her best work there. "What kind of work?" "Letters, mostly. She was a letter writer. Used to correspond with people all over the world. People she'd never met, probably never would meet. Just strangers who wanted to connect with other strangers. There used to be these clubs, before email, before social media, where people would exchange addresses and write to each other about their lives, their thoughts, whatever they wanted to share. My mother loved it. Said it was like being part of a secret network of kindred spirits. I thought about the letter in my book, the careful handwriting, the intimate yet impersonal tone. "Your mother still write letters?" "She passed away 3 years ago," the woman said, and there was a fondness in her voice, a gentle sadness. "But she wrote until the very end. Boxes and boxes of letters. I've been going through them slowly, trying to decide what to do with them. Some of them are addressed to people I can find, so I send them along. But others, she just wrote them and never mailed them, like she was putting thoughts out into the universe and trusting they'd find their way to whoever needed them." The rain started then, light and steady, and the woman said goodbye, hurrying down the street with her bag held over her head. I stayed there for a while longer, watching the rain turn the pavement dark, thinking about letters that find their way to strangers, about messages that travel through time, waiting patiently for the right moment to be discovered. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about the letter more than I probably should have. It had awakened something in me. A curiosity about the small mysteries of everyday life, about the stories that exist in the margins, the connections that happen quietly, below the surface of ordinary experience. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way certain streets felt different at different times of day. The expressions on the faces of people waiting at bus stops, the particular quality of light that filters through trees in late afternoon, the way the city revealed itself slowly to those willing to pay attention. I also started writing letters of my own, nothing too serious or structured, just thoughts and observations, small moments that seemed worth recording. I wrote about the cardinal that appeared at my window every morning, about the sound of rain on different surfaces, about the way my neighbor's garden changed with the seasons, about dreams I half remembered, and songs that got stuck in my head for no reason. I didn't address them to anyone specifically. I just wrote them, folded them, tucked them into books I was about to donate, into library books before returning them, into the pockets of coats at thrift stores. Little messages in bottles, sent out into the world without expectation or destination. You're listening to Whispering Woods, where every night brings another quiet tale. The strange thing was, I started finding more letters. not right away and not in any predictable pattern, but over the course of that spring and summer, I discovered 4 more. One was in a book of photographs at the library, pressed between images of a city I'd never visited. Another was folded into a street map I found at a yard sale. The third appeared in the mailbox at my apartment building, mixed in with the usual bills and advertisements, addressed to the one who needs this today, in that same careful cursive. The fourth I found on a park bench on a Sunday morning, weighted down with a smooth river stone, as though someone had left it there specifically for whoever sat down next. Each letter was different in content but similar in tone. They talked about ordinary moments, invested with strange significance, about the comfort of small rituals, about the way memory works, selective and surprising. They mentioned places I knew and places I'd never heard of, people who might have been real or might have been invented, moments that might have happened yesterday or 50 years ago. Time in these letters was fluid, unreliable, more felt than measured. They never demanded anything, never asked for a response, never even clearly indicated who had written them or why. They just were, like gifts given by someone who doesn't wait around to see them opened. I started keeping them all in a wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother, a small cedar chest with a tarnished brass clasp. Sometimes I'd take them out and read them in sequence, looking for patterns or connections. Sometimes I thought I found them, threads of similarity in the handwriting or the phrasing, recurring images of rain and windows and afternoon light. But maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see, imposing order on randomness, creating narrative where there was only coincidence. My friend Sarah thought the whole thing was elaborate performance art. "Someone's seeding the city with these mysterious letters," she said when I showed them to her one evening. "It's probably some kind of social experiment or art installation, very postmodern." "Maybe," I said, though I didn't really believe it. There was something too genuine about the letters, too unperformed. They didn't feel like art. They felt like communication, like someone reaching out across a gap they couldn't quite name. Or, Sarah suggested, swirling the wine in her glass, "You're writing them yourself and forgetting about it. Some kind of fugue state situation. I'm not having fugue states. How would you know? That's the whole thing about fugue states." But I knew I wasn't writing them. The handwriting was close to mine, but not quite, like a sibling or a cousin, related but distinct. And besides, some of the letters referenced things I didn't know, made observations about places I'd never been, used phrases I would never use. They were foreign but familiar, like overhearing a conversation in a language you almost understand. As summer deepened, I found myself walking more, taking longer routes home from work, wandering through neighborhoods I'd never explored, looking in the windows of shops and cafes, wondering if somewhere in the city someone else was finding letters, collecting them in their own wooden box, puzzling over the same questions. I liked the idea of it, a network of strangers connected by these small paper mysteries, each of us holding pieces of something larger without quite knowing what it was. One evening in late July, I was walking through the old part of downtown, where the buildings still had their original facades, and the streets were narrow and brick-paved. I passed a small used bookstore I'd never noticed before, its window display a careless arrangement of old hardcovers and vintage postcards. Something made me stop, some indefinable pull. The store was still open, a warm glow visible through the window, so I went in. The smell hit me immediately. Paper and dust and something else. Maybe cinnamon. Maybe old wood. Maybe just time itself. The space was narrow and deep, shelves rising to the ceiling, stacked in that particular way that suggests years of accumulation rather than any deliberate organization. An older man sat behind the counter, reading a thick book with a faded cover. He looked up when I entered and nodded, a gesture that seemed to say, "Look around as long as you like." I wandered the aisles slowly, running my fingers along spines, pulling out volumes at random. Poetry, philosophy, old novels with that specific mid-century cover design, travel guides to places that probably didn't exist anymore, not in the way they had when the guides were printed. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just letting my attention drift, seeing what wanted to be found. In the back corner, on a shelf of local history books, I found a thin volume bound in green cloth, its cover slightly warped as though it had once gotten wet. The title was barely visible, stamped in gold that had mostly worn away. Vanished Places, a guide to Portland's lost landmarks. I opened it carefully, the spine cracking softly, and flipped through pages of black and white photographs, buildings that had been torn down, businesses that had closed, parks that had been paved over. And there, on page 47, was the Evergreen Cafe. The photograph showed the storefront from across the street, rain-slicked pavement reflecting the lit windows. You could see inside a little, figures at tables, the suggestion of bookshelves along the walls. The image quality wasn't great, grainy and slightly out of focus, but something about it seized me. I could almost hear the murmur of conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine, the quiet scratch of pens on paper. The caption read, "The Evergreen Cafe, 5th Street, circa 1992. A gathering place for writers, students, and neighborhood regulars. Closed 2008. Underneath, in smaller print. Known for its extensive collection of second-hand books available for customers to read or purchase, and for its tradition of message leaving. Patrons would write notes and hide them in books, creating a community of anonymous correspondence that lasted throughout the cafe's 16-year run. I stood there for a long time, reading and rereading those words. Message leaving, a tradition, a community of anonymous correspondence. It wasn't just one person writing letters and hiding them in books. It was many people, a whole network of strangers, participating in this quiet practice of connection. And I had stumbled into it years after the cafe had closed, picked up a thread that had been waiting all this time to be followed. If your eyes are growing heavy, that's how you know you're safe here, safe in Whispering Woods. I bought the book, and the old man at the counter smiled when he saw what I'd chosen. "Ah," he said, "interested in local history? Something like that. Did you ever go to this place?" I showed him the page with the evergreen. His smile widened. "Many times. I used to write there, years ago, when I was working on my dissertation. Good coffee, quiet atmosphere. And yes, I participated in the message leaving. It was addictive in a way. This idea that you could communicate with strangers through books, that your words might find someone who needed them at exactly the right moment." "Do you know who started it?" He shook his head. "It was already happening when I first went there, back in 94 or 95. The owner, Margaret, she encouraged it, kept a basket of nice stationery at the counter, told people they were welcome to leave messages in the books. Some people wrote one or two and forgot about it. Others, like me, got into the habit. I probably left 30 or 40 over the years. Did you ever find any yourself? Messages other people had left?" "Oh, dozens. That was half the fun, discovering them. Some were profound, some were silly, Some were heartbreaking. I kept a few, the ones that really spoke to me. He paused, studying my face with a curious expression. Why do you ask? You seem more than casually interested. I told him about the letters I'd been finding, the one in my poetry book and the others that had followed. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. The thing about the message leaving, he finally said, was that it created these unexpected connections between people who would never otherwise meet. You'd read something someone left in a book, and even though you didn't know who they were, you'd feel this sense of kinship, this recognition, like finding out you're not alone in the particular way you experience the world. But the cafe closed 15 years ago. The cafe closed, he agreed, but the books didn't disappear. They went to estate sales, used bookstores, donation centers, people's personal libraries. The messages kept traveling, kept finding new readers. I imagine they're still out there, scattered through the city, waiting in used books and library volumes, little time capsules from a place that doesn't exist anymore. So someone might find one tomorrow, or next year, or 10 years from now. Exactly. The conversation continues, even though the place where it started is gone. There's something beautiful about that, don't you think? The way meaning persists, finding new contexts, reaching across time to touch people the original writers never imagined. I thought about this as I walked home that evening, the book tucked under my arm, the light fading from the sky in shades of peach and lavender. The city felt different somehow, more layered, more full of hidden connections and quiet continuities. Every used book was a potential bearer of messages, every bookshelf a kind of archive of strangers' thoughts, every library a vast network of possible encounters. The ordinary became mysterious, and the mystery felt like a gift. That night, I read through the book on vanished places, learning about all the businesses and buildings that had been part of Portland's landscape and were now only memories or photographs. Movie theaters that had shown silent films, department stores with pneumatic tube systems for payments, diners where you could get breakfast for 50 cents, hotels where traveling salesmen had stayed, dance halls that had hosted big bands, pharmacies with soda fountains, barber shops with antique chairs. Each one had been someone's regular spot, woven into their daily routine, the backdrop for ordinary moments that seemed unremarkable until they were gone. The Evergreen was just one among dozens, but it held my attention. I studied the photograph, trying to make out details, to see the people sitting at the tables more clearly, to read the spines of the books on the shelves. I wondered if any of the letter writers I'd been reading were in that image, frozen in a moment from 20 or 30 years ago, writing at the corner table while rain ran down the windows. I also wondered about the letters themselves, about the impulse to write something and leave it for a stranger. What made someone do that? Was it loneliness, a desire to reach out without the risk of real connection? Was it playfulness, the joy of creating small mysteries? Was it hope, a belief that words could bridge the gap between isolated individuals, that we might find each other across time and distance through nothing more than careful sentences on cream-colored paper? Maybe it was all of those things. Maybe it was none of them. Maybe it was just what humans do. This reaching out, this desire to say, I was here. I thought this, I felt that, and maybe you did too. Over the next few weeks, I visited every used bookstore I could find, browsing slowly through their sections, pulling out books and checking for messages. I didn't find any more letters, but I found other things. Margin notes in faded pencil, pressed flowers, old photographs used as bookmarks, shopping lists, ticket stubs, receipts from long-closed restaurants. Each one was a small artifact, a fragment of someone's life that had accidentally or intentionally ended up preserved between pages, waiting for someone like me to notice it. I also started being more intentional about the letters I left. I thought carefully about what I wanted to say, tried to write things that might comfort or intrigue or simply interest whoever found them. I wrote about the cardinal at my window and the pattern of its visits. I wrote about the sound of rain on different surfaces, tin roofs, car hoods, leaves, pavement, umbrellas. I wrote about the way certain smells could trigger memories, sending you instantly to a moment you'd forgotten. I wrote about the geometry of cities, the way streets intersect and create unexpected patterns, the way you could walk the same route 100 times and still notice something new. I left them in library books I was returning, in the poetry section mostly, figuring that people who read poetry might be more receptive to mysterious letters from strangers. I left them at bus stops, weighted down with stones. I left them at cafes, tucked under sugar dispensers or propped against salt shakers. I left them at bookstores, slipped into volumes that seemed like they wanted to hold secrets. Each time I left one, I felt a little flutter of anticipation, wondering who might find it, what they might think, whether it would mean anything to them or just be a momentary curiosity, quickly forgotten. Sarah said I was becoming obsessed, and maybe she was right, but it felt less like obsession and more like awakening. Like I'd discovered a way of moving through the world that made everything more vivid, more significant. I paid more attention to things. I noticed patterns and coincidences. I thought about other people more, wondered about their lives, their thoughts, their secrets. The city became a text I was learning to read, full of symbols and allusions, references and connections. Before you drift off, remember to follow Whispering Woods for tomorrow's story. In September, I found another letter. This one was different from the others, more direct, more personal. It was in a book I'd bought at a library sale, a collection of essays about nature and solitude. The envelope was the same cream-colored paper, but this time my name was written on it, my actual name, not just "Dear Friend" or "To the Reader." My hands shook a little as I opened it. "I know you've been looking," it said. "I've seen you in bookstores, checking volumes carefully, your fingers moving lightly over pages as though you're reading Braille. I've watched you leave your own messages, seen you place them carefully and walk away without looking back. I want you to know that this matters, what you're doing. It matters that you're paying attention, that you're participating in this old tradition, keeping it alive even though the place where it started is long gone." My heart was beating faster. Someone had been watching me, following me. It should have felt creepy, invasive, but somehow it didn't. It felt like being seen, truly seen, in a way that's increasingly rare. "Don't be alarmed," the letter continued, as though anticipating my reaction. "I'm not stalking you or anything sinister like that. I'm just someone who was part of the Evergreen community, someone who wrote and left many messages over the years, and who still does, even now, even though the cafe itself is gone. I've noticed you because you move through the world the way message leavers move through the world, with a particular kind of attention, a readiness to notice what others overlook. It's a way of being that recognizes that the everyday is full of significance, that small moments contain entire worlds, that strangers might be kindred spirits if only we could find ways to acknowledge each other." The letter went on to talk about the history of the Evergreen, how the message-leaving tradition had started almost by accident. A customer had left a note in a book, expressing their appreciation for something the author had written. Another customer found it and wrote a response, tucking it into a different book. Then others joined in, and it became a thing, an unofficial practice that gave the cafe an extra layer of meaning, turned it from just a place to drink coffee and read into a site of ongoing anonymous conversation. Margaret, who owned the cafe, used to say that the messages were like a garden we were all tending together. Each person would plant their words, not knowing if they'd grow or wither, not knowing who might harvest them. But the act of tending, of planting, of participating in this communal creation, that was what mattered. We were building something together, something that existed in the spaces between us, something that couldn't be owned or controlled, only nurtured and shared. The letter ended with an invitation. If you'd like to meet, to talk about the Evergreen and message leaving and what it means to stay connected in a disconnected world, I'll be at Powell's on Burnside, in the green room. On Saturday at 3 o'clock, I'll be reading a book with a red cover. You'll recognize me, I think, though we've never officially met. Or maybe we have, in the way that matters most, through words on paper, through thoughts shared across time and distance, through this strange and beautiful practice of leaving messages for strangers who might become friends. It wasn't signed, but at the bottom was a small drawing, a simple sketch of a tree with leaves falling. Saturday was 4 days away. I spent those days in a state of heightened awareness, excited and nervous and curious. I kept rereading the letter, analyzing each sentence, trying to figure out who had written it. Someone who knew me, or at least knew of me, who had observed me in bookstores and cafes. Someone who had been part of the Evergreen community, which meant someone probably in their 40s or 50s now. Someone who had been in their 20s or 30s when the cafe existed. Someone who still cared about this odd practice of message leaving, who still participated in it, who saw me as a kindred spirit. Saturday arrived overcast and cool, the first real taste of autumn in the air. I got to Powell's early, at 2:30, and wandered the aisles, too restless to really look at books. The green room was on the second floor, dedicated to science fiction and fantasy, and when I walked in at 5 minutes to 3, I scanned the space looking for someone reading a book with a red cover. There were several people scattered around the room, browsing shelves or sitting in chairs reading. I almost missed her at first, a woman sitting in the corner by the window, a paperback with a red cover open in her lap, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked up as I approached, and her face broke into a smile of recognition, though I was certain we'd never met. "Hello," she said, and her voice was warm, familiar in a way I couldn't place. "I'm glad you came. I wasn't entirely sure you would." "How could I not?" I said, sitting in the chair across from her. "Your letter was very compelling." "I hoped it would be. I've been wanting to reach out for a while now. But I wanted to be sure you were really committed to this, that you understood what message leaving means, what it can become if you let it." "What can it become?" She closed her book and set it aside, giving me her full attention. A way of life, almost. A practice of attention and intention. Once you start really participating, once you understand that the world is full of these small opportunities for connection, it changes how you experience everything. You start to see possibilities everywhere, to notice the ways people reach out to each other in small, quiet ways. It makes the world feel less lonely, less fragmented. It creates a sense of community that doesn't require physical proximity or even direct communication. We talked for over an hour, there in the green room, surrounded by stories of distant worlds and fantastical possibilities. Her name was Eleanor, and she had been a regular at the Evergreen from its opening until its closing, had written hundreds of messages over those 16 years, had found even more. She told me about messages that had made her cry, messages that had made her laugh, messages that had arrived at exactly the moment she needed them, answering questions she hadn't known she was asking. The remarkable thing, she said, was the way the practice created this invisible web of connection. People who never met, never knew each other's names, were in conversation. Someone would write about their grief over a lost parent, and months later, someone else would find it and write a response, sharing their own experience of loss. Those two pieces of paper might never be found by the same person, might end up in completely different books that went to completely different places, but the conversation had happened, the sharing had occurred, and both writers would have felt less alone. Did you ever try to find the other writers, figure out who they were? Sometimes. I recognized a few people's handwriting or their particular style of expression, but mostly no. The anonymity was important. It meant you could be completely honest, could say things you might not say to someone you knew, and it also meant that what mattered was the words themselves, the ideas, the feelings, not the identity of the person behind them. We were all just voices, speaking into the void and hoping for an echo. I asked her about the letters I'd been finding, whether she'd written any of them. She smiled and said, "Maybe. Does it matter? I suppose not. The point is, you found them. They spoke to you. They drew you into this practice, made you part of this ongoing conversation. Who originally wrote them is less important than what they've become, what they mean now, how they've connected you to something larger than yourself." Before I left, Eleanor gave me a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Don't open it until you get home," she said. "It's something I want you to have, something I think you'll appreciate." I promised I would wait, and we said goodbye with a sense of having known each other for much longer than an hour, with an understanding that we would likely not see each other again, but that it didn't matter. That we were connected in ways that didn't require physical presence or regular contact. At home, I unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a box of cream-colored stationery, the same thick, textured paper the letters had been written on, and a fountain pen with a wooden barrel, smooth and weighted perfectly in the hand. There was also a note. "For your messages, write often. Write honestly. Write with the knowledge that your words will find the people who need them. Trust the process. Trust the connections. Trust the strange and beautiful way that meaning travels through the world, finding us when we most need to be found." That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a long letter about the Evergreen and Eleanor, about message leaving and the way it had changed my experience of the world, about the comfort of knowing that there are strangers out there who might understand you, who might be searching for the same things you're searching for, who might need to hear exactly what you have to say. I wrote about the books we carry with us, the words that stay with us, the moments that define us in ways we don't realize until much later. I wrote about the practice of attention, of noticing, of caring about small things. I wrote until my hand cramped and the night had grown late and deep, until I'd said everything I needed to say. I folded the letter carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and the next day I left it in a book at a neighborhood bookstore, pressed between pages that talked about the geometry of cities, the patterns we make as we move through space, the invisible threads that connect us to each other and to the places we inhabit. And then I kept going. I kept writing and leaving messages, kept looking for messages left by others, kept participating in this quiet, ongoing conversation that spans time and space, that connects strangers and creates community without the usual structures of community, that makes the world feel rich and textured and full of possibility. Months passed, then years. The practice became part of my routine, as natural as breathing, as automatic as checking the mail. I moved through the world differently now, with a sense that I was part of something larger and older than myself, a tradition of reaching out, of making connections, of insisting that words matter, that communication matters, that we can find each other even in the midst of isolation and disconnection. I found more letters, of course. They appeared with pleasant irregularity, always when I needed them most, always saying something that resonated with where I was in my life. I never knew if Eleanor wrote them, or if they came from other members of the old Evergreen community, or if new people had joined the practice, discovered it the way I had, through accident and curiosity and a willingness to believe in small mysteries. I also heard back, in a way. Not directly, but through the messages I found, through phrases that seemed to respond to things I'd written, through ideas that built on ideas I'd shared. The conversation was happening, invisible and asynchronous, a call and response stretched across time, a dialogue conducted through whispers and echoes, through words left in books and found by chance. Sometimes I thought about the letter that started it all, the one I'd found in my poetry collection on that Tuesday in March. I thought about the person who wrote it, sitting in the Evergreen on a rainy afternoon, carefully forming words, sealing the envelope, hiding it in a book, not knowing when or if it would be discovered, not knowing that it would eventually find someone who needed it, who would be changed by it, who would be drawn into this practice and make it their own. That's the thing about messages, about words we send out into the world without knowing their destination. They have their own life, their own trajectory. They find their way to where they need to be, fulfill purposes we never intended, create connections we never imagined. We plant seeds without knowing what will grow, toss bottles into the ocean without knowing what shore they'll wash up on, write letters to strangers who may not even exist yet, trusting that somehow, somewhere, someone will read them and understand. The autumn rain returned, as it does every year, turning the city soft and gray and introspective. I found myself often at windows, watching the water run down glass, thinking about the Evergreen and Eleanor and all the other message leavers, past and present, thinking about the invisible network we were all part of, the web of connection that existed in the spaces between us, sustained by nothing more than attention and intention and the strange human need to reach across the void toward other people. On a particularly rainy Tuesday evening, I was reorganizing my bookshelves when I came across that original poetry collection, the one where I'd found the first letter. I opened it randomly, letting pages fall where they would, and found myself reading a poem about rain and memory, about the way water makes everything fluid, including time, including the boundaries between self and other, past and present, known and unknown. There was a margin note in pencil, faint but legible, in handwriting I didn't recognize. This poem finds me every autumn. Every year it means something different. This year it means home. I wondered who had written it, when they'd written it, whether they'd been part of the Evergreen community or were just someone who liked to leave traces of themselves in books. I wondered if they were still alive, still reading, still finding meaning in poems and leaving notes in margins. I wondered if our paths had ever crossed, if we'd ever stood in the same bookstore or sat in the same cafe, unknown to each other, passing like ships in fog. I took out my fountain pen and on the opposite margin I wrote, "It found me too, led me somewhere I didn't know I needed to go. Thank you for leaving these words, for being part of this ongoing conversation." Then I closed the book and returned it to the shelf, knowing that someday I might open it again, might find my own note and be reminded of this evening, this moment of connection across time with an unknown other, this small act of participation in something larger than myself. The rain continued through the night, steady and gentle, the kind of rain that makes you want to stay inside with warm tea and soft light, the kind that turns the world quiet and contemplative. I made chamomile tea, lit candles, sat by the window watching the way streetlights reflected on wet pavement, creating pools of gold and amber, watching the way people hurried past under umbrellas, each one carrying their own stories, their own sorrows and joys, their own private experiences of the world. I thought about Eleanor's words, about message leaving as a practice of attention, about the way it changes your experience of the world. She was right. Once you start paying attention in this particular way, you can't stop. You notice everything. The way light falls through leaves, the expression on a stranger's face as they read a book on the bus, the particular quality of silence in a library, the smell of old paper and fresh coffee, the sound of pages turning, the weight of a book in your hands. All of it becomes significant. All of it matters. All of it is part of the story you're telling yourself about the world and your place in it. And beyond that, there's the awareness of other people doing the same thing, other people paying attention, leaving their own messages, creating their own connections. You're never alone when you're part of this practice, because you know that somewhere, someone else is writing carefully on cream-colored paper, choosing their words with intention, folding the letter, placing it somewhere for someone else to find. You're part of a community that exists in time as well as space, that stretches back to the beginning of the Evergreen and forward into an unknown future, that includes people you'll never meet, but who share your sense that words matter, that small gestures matter, that reaching out matters even when you don't know who you're reaching toward. The candle flames wavered in a draft I couldn't feel. Shadows moved on the walls. The rain intensified briefly, then gentled again. Somewhere in the city, someone was probably finding one of my messages, reading it with curiosity or confusion or recognition, deciding whether to keep it or leave it or write a response. Somewhere, someone was writing a message of their own, thinking about what they wanted to say, hoping it would find its way to someone who needed it. Somewhere, the conversation continued, invisible and persistent, a thread running through the city, connecting strangers through words on paper, through shared attention, through the practice of reaching out into the unknown and trusting that someone will reach back. I finished my tea and wrote one more letter before bed. This one was about rain, about the comfort of being inside when the weather turns, about the way certain sounds can make you feel safe and held. I wrote about childhood evenings, the smell of dinner cooking, the sound of voices in another room, the feeling of being protected from the storm. I wrote about how we carry those moments with us, how they become the standard by which we measure all subsequent experiences of safety and comfort, how we spend our lives trying to recreate them or find new versions of them, how home is less a place than a feeling, less a location than a quality of attention, less something you find than something you create through small acts of care and presence. I sealed the letter, set it on my desk to deliver tomorrow, and went to bed listening to the rain, feeling held by the sound of it, feeling connected to everyone else in the city who was also listening, also finding comfort in the steady rhythm of water on roof and street and leaf, also drifting toward sleep with a sense of being part of something larger and older than themselves, something that would continue long after they were gone, something sustained by nothing more than attention and intention, and the human need to reach out, to connect, to say, I am here. Are you there? We exist in the same world. Isn't that remarkable? The cardinal appeared at my window in the morning, right on schedule, its red feathers impossibly bright against the gray sky. I watched it for a while, drinking my coffee, thinking about routine and reliability, about the comfort of expected things happening when they're supposed to happen, about the way certain small presences in our lives become anchors, touchstones, ways of marking time and maintaining orientation in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. Over breakfast, I read through some of the letters I'd collected, pulling them from the cedar box and spreading them across the table. Reading them in sequence, I could trace a kind of evolution, a developing conversation about attention and presence and connection. Early letters were more tentative, uncertain, feeling their way toward articulation. Later ones were more confident, more direct, as though the writers had found their voice, had learned what they wanted to say and how to say it. Or maybe I was projecting, seeing patterns that weren't really there, imposing narrative on what was actually just randomness and coincidence. But then again, maybe that's what we always do, what we have to do to make sense of the world. We find patterns. We create stories. We connect dots that might not actually connect, but in the connecting, we make meaning. We build understanding. We transform random events into coherent narrative. I thought about my own letters, the dozens I'd written and left over the past year. I wondered what kind of pattern they made, what story they told, whether anyone was collecting them the way I was collecting others, whether someone out there had a box full of my messages and was trying to decode them, to understand the person behind the words, to connect with me across the distance created by anonymity and time. The thought made me feel both exposed and protected. Exposed because my letters revealed things about me, my thoughts and feelings and way of seeing the world. Protected because no one knew who I was. No one could connect the letters to my actual identity. No one could judge or dismiss or misunderstand me in the ways that happen when people meet face to face, when all the complications of physical presence and social dynamics come into play. That afternoon, I delivered the letter I'd written the night before, leaving it in a book about weather patterns at a bookstore across town. I also browsed the shelves, checking books for messages, finding nothing but not minding the lack. The looking was as important as the finding, maybe more important. The looking meant staying open to possibility, maintaining readiness for surprise, moving through the world with a kind of gentle anticipation. On my way home, I stopped at a cafe, not the one where the Evergreen had been, but a different one. Smaller, quieter, with wooden tables and mismatched chairs and walls lined with books. I ordered chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching people pass on the street outside, each one absorbed in their own thoughts, their own errands, their own private experience of this particular Tuesday afternoon. A woman at the next table was writing in a notebook, her pen moving quickly across the page, pausing occasionally as she looked out the window or down at her tea. A man in the corner was reading a thick paperback, his expression absorbed, occasionally nodding slightly as though agreeing with something the author had written. A couple near the door sat close together, speaking in low voices, their hands occasionally meeting across the table in small gestures of affection and emphasis. All these small moments, unremarkable and yet remarkable. All these people living their lives, carrying their stories, experiencing the world through their own unique combination of memory and hope and present attention. All of us together in this space, separate but connected, unknown to each other but sharing this moment, this light, this air, this brief intersection of paths. I thought about writing a letter about this, about the cafe and the people in it, about the quality of Tuesday afternoon light and the comfort of being alone in public, surrounded by the quiet sounds of other people's presence. But instead, I just sat and observed, letting the moment be what it was without trying to capture it or translate it into words. Sometimes the practice of attention meant simply attending, being present without needing to record or communicate or create something from the experience. The woman at the next table closed her notebook, finished her tea, and left. The man in the corner turned a page. The couple stood up, gathered their things, exited together. New people arrived, claimed empty tables, ordered drinks, opened books or laptops, or began conversations. The cafe continued, an ongoing scene with rotating cast, a stage where small human moments played out hour after hour, day after day, unremarked and mostly forgotten, but no less real for their lack of documentation. As evening approached, the light changed, became softer, more golden. The cafe grew busier, with the after-work crowd, people seeking coffee and Wi-Fi and a place to decompress before heading home. I stayed longer than I'd planned, held there by the atmosphere, by the sense that something about this time and place was important, though I couldn't have said what or why. Eventually, I left, walking home through streets that were growing familiar, past buildings I'd passed hundreds of times, through a neighborhood that was becoming mine, not through ownership, but through accumulated experience, through repeated passage, through the slow process of attention and recognition that transforms unknown space into known place, stranger into neighbor, city into home. That night, I dreamed about the Evergreen. In the dream, it still existed, and I was sitting at the corner table by the window, rain running down glass, a pot of chamomile tea growing cold at my elbow, a stack of books beside me, each one containing a letter written by someone I'd never met but somehow knew intimately. I opened them one by one, reading words that seemed to respond directly to thoughts I'd had, questions I'd asked, feelings I'd experienced. The dream logic of it didn't strike me as strange. It felt natural, inevitable, as though this was how things had always worked, as though connection across time and distance was the most ordinary thing in the world. When I woke, the sense of the dream stayed with me, that feeling of being surrounded by messages, by words written specifically for me but also for everyone, by a community that existed in letters and margins and the spaces between pages. It stayed with me through morning coffee and the cardinal's appearance, through breakfast and the beginning of another day. A Tuesday like the Tuesday when I'd found that first letter, which was really just the beginning. The moment when I stumbled into a conversation that had been happening all along, waiting for me to join it. And now here I am, a year later, still participating, still writing and leaving messages, still looking for them in unexpected places, still part of this invisible network of strangers who share the sense that words matter, that reaching out matters, that we can find each other through nothing more than careful sentences on cream-colored paper, through attention and intention and the belief that somewhere, someone is listening, someone is reading, someone is there on the other end of the line, separated by time and space and anonymity, but connected nonetheless by the practice of message leaving, by the old tradition of the evergreen, by the simple human need to say, I am here, are you there? We exist together in this strange and beautiful world. The rain has returned again tonight, steady and gentle, the kind that will last for hours, turning the streets dark and reflective, making everyone inside feel sheltered and safe. I'm sitting by my window, watching the way water catches light, creates patterns, transforms the familiar view into something slightly strange, slightly magical, like a scene from a dream or a memory that might not be entirely accurate but feels true in the way that matters. I have a stack of cream-colored paper on my desk, the fountain pen Eleanor gave me, a box full of letters I've received, and a sense of being exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. Not because there's any grand purpose or ultimate meaning, but because this practice of attention, this habit of noticing and recording and sharing, makes the world feel more alive, more connected, more full of possibility. Tomorrow I'll write another letter. I'll fold it carefully, seal it in an envelope, leave it somewhere for someone to find. Maybe they'll read it with interest, maybe with confusion, maybe they'll ignore it entirely. It doesn't matter. What matters is the writing itself, the reaching out, the participation in this ongoing conversation that connects past and present and future, that turns strangers into kindred spirits, that insists against all evidence that we are not alone, that meaning persists, that words matter, that the small gestures we make in the course of ordinary days can ripple outward in ways we'll never fully know or understand. The rain continues. The candles burn down slowly. The city settles into evening, everyone in their own spaces, carrying their own stories, experiencing their own version of this rainy Tuesday night. And somewhere, someone is finding a letter, opening it with curious hands, reading words that were written for them without the writer knowing they existed, feeling that sudden recognition, that sense of being seen and understood, that comfort of knowing that someone else has felt what they feel, thought what they think, wondered what they wonder. The conversation continues. The messages travel. The connections form and reform. Invisible but real, sustained by nothing more than attention and intention and the practice of reaching out into the unknown, trusting that somewhere, someone will reach back. That, across time and distance and all the barriers that separate us, we can still find each other, can still say, "Hello, I am here, I see you, you are not alone, we exist together in this world." And isn't that something? Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that enough?